What's happening, Deer Park students? This is Mr. Moore talking today about Latin American independence and Latin American nationalism, right? So we're going to get through this, talk about these key ideas and how these Latin American countries were created. So if you look at the map here, you'll see what it looked like in 1800. And if you notice, there were two countries that dominated Latin America. Those two countries were Spain, which are all the green spots, and Portugal. And it is that reason these two languages of Spanish and Portuguese are based on Latin, hence the name Latin America. Okay, Latin was the language of the Roman Empire, and Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian are all languages based on Latin. Same thing with French. French is based on Latin too. But if you fast forward to 1830, this 1830 map, what has happened to Latin America? Well, all of those areas that used to be Spanish or French controlled, they are pretty much all independent. So the question is, how do we go from to all colonies to independent countries? All right, that's what we're going to try to figure out today. Now, to really understand Latin America, you got to know the social classes, all right? The social classes. And if you notice the shape, this is the same shape that is on the guided notes handout that you can look at, is, it is a triangle, okay, or a pyramid shape. And part of the reason it is a pyramid shape, the symbolism is, of course, at the top, there are very few people. And those people have a lot of power. They're high up. Get it? They're high up. At the bottom, however, you have the people that have a little bit of power. Okay, but there are a lot of them. They have little to no power, but there's a lot of them. They're very low on the spectrum, on the social class scale, right? So it's important to know this social class system. Just like we did with the French Revolution, with the first estate, second estate, third estate, you got to know the differences between the social classes. So on the top, very top of the list are called the Peninsulares. That's how you say that word, Peninsulares. That word peninsulare is based off the word peninsula, because these people were found in the Iberian Peninsula. They were born in what's known as Spain and Portugal today. Hold on. Thank you, sir. Close the door. Thank you. They had all the economic and political power. They're at the top, right? That makes sense. They're at the top. So essentially, because they were born in the, quote, mother country, the home country of Spain or Portugal, they had all the power. And so they were often shipped across the ocean to the New World, to the Latin American countries to, run things, run the show. And these people, of course, were conservatives. Remember our isms? Right wing, left wing. These are the right wing conservatives in Latin America because they want to have all the power. They want to keep the king. The king gave them their job, so of course they want the power, right? And one other thing to note is their skin color. Skin color is something I know sometimes people get uncomfortable talking about skin color and race, but it was a big deal in Latin America. People in Spain or Portugal typically have lighter skin, and essentially the people with the lighter skin had more power in Latin America. Next on the list are the Creoles. The Creoles are second on the list because they were born somewhere else. They were born in Latin America. They were not born back in Spain. Maybe their parents were, or grandparents, but they were born on this side of the world, in this hemisphere. Essentially, because of that, they had no political rights. They had no say in the government. They couldn't make rules about the economy. They couldn't make rules about politics. They had no political power. They could gain wealth. They could gain rank in the military, but they had no political rights. And because of that, they were considered kind of second-class citizens. They were lesser because of that. They were considered not as good just because they were born somewhere else. They favored things like equality of law. Okay, they favored freedom, like freedom of speech, freedom of trade, freedom of the press. In particular, freedom of trade, right? They loved the fact that they could trade with other countries, not just Spain or Portugal. They could trade with the American colonies. They could trade with the British if they wanted, or the French. They wanted to have the freedom to gain their own wealth and not be held back by their king and the king's leaders, the Peninsulares. Isms. If you think about isms, these people are on the left. I know I gave it away. They're the liberals. They're the ones who wanted liberty. They're the ones that wanted to lead revolutions. They wanted to make change because the times they are changing in Latin America. And the group they are similar to, remember that group that was educated but didn't have political power? They were similar to the bourgeoisie, okay? Just like the bourgeois. They wanted power that they did not already have. Okay? Next on the list, you have the mixed race people. You have the Mestizos, people mixed between European and Indian ancestry, right? Native American Indians lived in this area. Typically, you had a Latin American man, Indian woman. The baby would be a mestizo. This little girl would be a mestizo. Mulattoes, you have a mixed race between European and African ancestry. Okay, usually it was a African woman, European man. The baby would be a mulatto. Now, the reason this happened, well, there weren't a lot of Spanish women around. That was the big problem. These were typically young men in their late teens, early 20s, into their 30s, and they were looking for wives, looking for love, if you want to say that. But there weren't a lot of European women around. And they looked around and they found Native American women. And then when slavery starts happening, you see African women coming there, okay? And they mixed in with them. Now, some of it was based on love and marriage. Some of it was kind of forced and the terrible situations that happened with that. But that's where you get that mixed race of people. And heck, our former President Obama, let me say he's the first African-American president. Well, he's technically the first mulatto president because his mom's family were white. They were born in Iowa. His dad was actually from Africa. So he was a mulatto, literally kind of just like they talked about here. And these people tended to be not conservative, not really liberal, but more radical in their belief. They were treated lesser simply because of their skin color. And what's crazy is maybe their father had more rights than they did. And sometimes their fathers would disown the kids, and they were treated a lot lesser. And they weren't leaders of the revolution as much, but they became kind of the followers, the ones who were going to fight hard for rights. Native Americans. Obviously, if you're mixing with a group, you got to have that group. And the Native Americans are the next on the list. Native Americans initially were used as slaves. When Columbus and the other explorers got there, they saw gold and they saw a group of people they could use as slaves. And unfortunately for these people, many died of disease. Okay, they died in wars with the Spanish, and so it was a terrible situation. Or if they were lucky enough, maybe they lived out in the middle of the Amazon rainforest and they were isolated enough from the Spanish. The Spanish tend to settle on the coastal areas or on the islands, not inland very far. And as I said, they were originally the largest population. You can see all the indigenous groups, okay? The Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca, they're the most famous, but you have all these others, the Taino and the Carbi, and you can learn a huge amount of information just about these Latin American, Native American people, okay? And unfortunately for them, they lost their lives, they lost their land, they lost control over everything. They're the kind of the big losers in all this. Right, because of what happened to them. They were devastated. So we just got done talking about Christopher Columbus and Columbus Day, and should we celebrate Columbus? I mean, he did, help open up trade with the New World and quote, discovered America, but what effect did it have to the Native American populations, right? Devastated these people because of the European exploration. Now, 5 and 6 could be intermixed. I put 6 at the bottom, not because they were worse or anything, but because of how they were treated. And their main job, why they were brought to Latin America, was they were there surely to be slaves. Now there were some that gained their freedom from different ways and but for the most part they were brought as part of the slave trade, which I'm sure you guys learned about last year in 8th grade or 7th grade, to work on plantations. Okay, the triangular trade situation from Africa to the New World back to Europe. You see this mix. And one of the crazy things to know is there was a lot of them. 10 million people went to South America or Central America or the West Indies. So you add all these numbers up, that's over 10 million people. Sorry, I went too far. Over 10 million people, where only about 500,000 went to North America. we talk about how bad slavery was here, and the cotton gin, and cotton is king, and the whole that was terrible. But even more slavery in Central, South America, and then the West Indies, which we call the Caribbean countries today. And of course, those people as slaves were treated like property and had no rights at all, because they were treated not even as human beings; they were treated as property. Now, there is a fantastic little video clip we're going to watch about Simón Bolívar, this individual down here. So you can watch it to figure out this information. You read about him in your textbook. There's a bunch about Simón Bolívar in your book. But his social background, he is a Creole. He is going to lead the revolutions. Okay, his parents owned a massive plantation up here in what's present-day Venezuela. He was kind of a snotty kid, didn't want to listen to anybody, and, typical kind of rich kid at the time. But he had no political rights. And when he was a young man, he went to Europe and explored and did some studying in Europe. And he learned about the ideas of the revolution, about liberty and equality. He studied the French Revolution and learned about all those ideas that had been taught in the Enlightenment. So when he comes back as a married man. The woman that he loves, he met back in Spain, actually dies not soon after she gets to Venezuela. She gets sick and dies of a tropical disease. So his life takes a drastic turn from being a all about me person and wealth and influence to, I want to free my people. I want to make the people of Latin America separate from Europe. He saw what was happening in Spain. He's like, these people aren't special. They're not better than us. We should have control of ourselves. And because of that, he is the founding father of not one, not two, not three, not four, but 5 different countries: Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia, his namesake country, all gained independence because of Simón Bolívar. He is an extremely important figure in South American, Latin American history. And he's a lot like George Washington. They actually call him the Latin American George Washington, because just like George Washington, he was a general. He was a plantation owner. He was educated on the Enlightenment. He led the wars for independence. Okay, he becomes the first president of what he calls Grand Colombia, right? And he tries to hold all these Latin American people together. Unfortunately, unlike George Washington, he was unable to do that. The Latin American countries broke apart. So instead of a Grand Colombia, you have Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. They all broke apart. Whereas George Washington kept the United States together, okay, as well as the other founding fathers. Okay, they literally call him the American Liberator. Hello. All right. Outside of that, we are done with our notes. So hopefully you have this in your guided notes handouts, and we can move on to bigger and better things tomorrow. Other than that, have a great day. We will